February 23rd, 1945. On the slopes of Mount Suribachi, a young Japanese soldier named Kenji Sato huddled in a darkened bunker, his hands shaking as he scrawled a secret confession. The Americans we face are not ordinary soldiers. They possess a resilience I have never witnessed. Every lesson we were taught about their weakness was a dangerous fiction. Peering through the narrow firing slit, he had just seen something that defied all military logic. A squad of Marines had charged his unit's position through a storm of machine gun fire. Half of them fell, but the rest did not even slow their advance. When his comrades threw a volley of grenades, one of the Americans used his own body to shield the others from the blast. Despite horrific injuries, the man continued to fight until he could no longer lift his weapon. His squad overran the position. Minutes later, this was Iwo Jima. Here, 21,000 Japanese defenders were dug into a vast network of over 11 miles of tunnels and fortified positions. They had been assured they would face a soft, undisciplined enemy that would break under a determined assault. The reality they encountered would shatter every assumption Imperial Japan held about its adversary. The brutal calculus of this miscalculation was not written in strategy documents, but in the savage close-quarters combat that would claim 26,000 Marine casualties in just over a month. The collapse of Japanese confidence began years earlier on a steamy island in the Solomon Islands. August 7, 1942, Guadalcanal. A seasoned veteran of the war in China, Corporal Akira Tanaka wrote in his diary after the first week of fighting, "The Americans who have landed here are unlike any foe we have encountered. They do not retreat when encircled. They do not surrender when their situation becomes hopeless. Most unnerving of all, they operate in the darkness as if the night itself is their ally." Guadalcanal was Japan's first major defensive battle in the Pacific, and the Imperial Army anticipated a swift victory over an inexperienced force. The initial Marine division that came ashore numbered just over 16,000 men. Japanese intelligence had briefed that these Marines were elite, but still products of a decadent, individualistic society that prized personal comfort above collective duty. Within days, every one of those assumptions was proven catastrophically incorrect. Lieutenant Jiro Tanaka commanded a reinforced company ordered to retake the vital Henderson Field on the night of August 20th. His unit, 200 strong, had previously defeated Chinese forces 3 times their size. They advanced using perfected tactical doctrine, confident that the Americans would be thrown into disarray by a night assault. The Marines were not panicked. They were waiting, entrenched in carefully prepared positions with interlocking fields of fire. Tanaka's company had marched directly into a kill zone. What happened next contradicted every tenet of Japanese combat training. Instead of digging in to defend, the Marines immediately launched a ferocious counterattack into the blackness using automatic weapons with shocking accuracy. Tanaka's diary, recovered after he was killed days later, recorded his disbelief. "They came for us in the dark. We are the ones who were supposed to own the night. They moved through jungle we believed was impassable. They struck silently, and then they vanished. By sunrise, only 90 men from my company remained. The Americans had lost 12. This pattern repeated itself across Guadalcanal. Japanese forces, accustomed to enemies crumbling under the weight of a banzai charge, found themselves facing Marines who held their ground until they were physically overrun, then fought on with bayonets, knives, and bare hands. Sergeant Takeshi Morita, who survived 4 months on the island before being evacuated, wrote in a letter later intercepted, "We were told the Americans were selfish, that they would not die for their brothers. This is a lie. I saw a Marine machine gunner continue to fire his weapon after both of his legs were shattered, only stopping when our infantry reached his position and killed him. His assistant immediately took over the gun and resumed firing. We lost 40 men to that single emplacement." The training that forged such soldiers was a mystery to Japanese analysts. Private Kenji Sato, who would later face Marines on Iwo Jima, first learned of them in a 1943 intelligence briefing. The instructor, a staff officer who had questioned captured Marines, seemed genuinely disturbed. The American Marines endure a conditioning process that would be considered criminal in any civilized army. They are mentally and physically broken down, then rebuilt into something that scarcely resembles the soft civilians they once were. They are taught that death in combat is honorable, that surrender is never an option, to fight until they are physically incapable. It sounds familiar. Yes, they have adopted our own warrior ethos, but they have combined it with something we did not foresee: American industrial might. This combination proved devastating. Japanese soldiers, steeped in the code of Bushido, were prepared to die before facing dishonor, but they fought with increasingly inferior equipment. The Marines underwent a training regimen nearly as brutal as that of the Japanese, creating warriors just as willing to sacrifice everything. But those Marines landed with overwhelming firepower that made even the most determined Japanese positions untenable. November 20th, 1943, the Tarawa Atoll. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibabaki commanded 4,500 defenders in fortifications believed to be unassailable. The 2nd Marine Division proved him wrong in just 76 hours. Private First Class Hiroshi Onoda, one of only 17 Japanese survivors, later told interrogators what he saw. The first wave was cut down in the water. We killed hundreds. More landing craft arrived. The second wave died on the beach. More came. The third wave reached our lines with flamethrowers. They did not stop until we were all dead, or they were. The numbers were horrific. Nearly 1,700 Marines died taking Tarawa in less than 3 days. The survivors had demonstrated a terrifying new reality. They would secure any objective, no matter the cost. Documents captured later on Saipan contained Japanese intelligence reports describing Marines as shock troops who display a fanatical devotion to their goals. Marines refuse orders to retreat and will counterattack even when the tactical situation is against them. Casualties do not degrade a Marine unit's effectiveness until the unit is nearly annihilated. This classification came from systematic study. Captain Masao Shimada, a Guadalcanal survivor, provided detailed comparisons. American Army infantry tactics are conventional and sound. The Marines operate on a different principle. They advance with relentless aggression regardless of losses. They accept casualty rates that would force any rational commander to halt. This is unprecedented. The speed of Marine operations was as devastating as their firepower. Lieutenant Colonel Masaru Kusaka, who commanded defenses on Peleliu, had based his plans on previous campaigns where American forces would consolidate after a landing. The Marines never paused. They landed on September 15th and controlled half the airfield by nightfall. Kusaka's diary recorded his shock. My entire defensive plan collapsed because it assumed the enemy would behave logically. The Marines do not act logically. They act with total, unwavering commitment, no matter the circumstances. This absolute commitment manifested in ways that seemed suicidal to Japanese observers, yet were terrifyingly effective. Sergeant Takeshi Morita, captured on Bougainville, described watching a Marine platoon assault a fortified hill. The approach was across open ground, swept by machine gun fire from 3 pillboxes. Japanese doctrine would require extensive artillery bombardment followed by an infantry assault under smoke cover. The Marine lieutenant looked at the position for half a minute, then ordered a direct assault with no preparation. The platoon charged straight into the fire. 7 men fell in the first 20 seconds. The survivors reached the first bunker and destroyed it with grenades and explosives. 3 more men fell taking the second bunker. The remaining Marines secured it. The final bunker fell to the last 5 men standing. The platoon took 12 casualties. From 37 men to seize a position we thought was impregnable. The entire action from the order to the end took 4 minutes. This was not mere courage. This was the systematic application of acceptable losses to achieve an objective faster than we could possibly react. The very concept of acceptable casualties horrified Japanese officers who were trained to value their soldiers' lives within the context of achieving objectives. Marines calculated casualties as the simple cost of victory, and they paid that price without hesitation. This created a psychological advantage that went beyond mere material superiority. Japanese commanders, knowing the Marines would accept 50% losses to take a position, faced impossible choices: defend with insufficient force and lose the position, commit adequate force but weaken other sectors, abandon the position, and cede vital ground. Every option led to defeat. The only variable was how long it would take. Major Ichiro Sato, a senior staff officer on Iwo Jima who survived the battle, analyzed this dilemma after the war. General Kuribayashi understood that we could not stop the Marines. Our defenses were designed to delay them and inflict maximum casualties. We succeeded brilliantly in inflicting casualties. Over 20,000 Marines were killed or wounded in 36 days. This would have shattered any other military's ability to continue offensive operations. The Marines received reinforcements and continued their attack with no reduction in ferocity. We calculated that 10,000 casualties would halt their advance for a week. They suffered 10,000 casualties in the first week, and their advance never slowed. This revealed the fundamental imbalance. They could replace their losses faster than we could inflict them. They had a seemingly endless supply of divisions in the Pacific or training back in America. We had a finite number of defenders on each island. Simple mathematics dictated our defeat. The mathematics extended far beyond manpower. Marines landed with a logistical support system that enabled sustained combat at an intensity Japanese forces could not hope to match. Second Lieutenant Kaido Nakamura, captured on Saipan, witnessed the contrast during a night reconnaissance mission. I led a patrol to observe the American lines 3 days after their landing. We expected to find exhausted troops with dwindling supplies, as our own forces would have been after 3 days of intense combat on a contested beachhead. Instead, we found Marines eating hot meals, receiving truckloads of fresh ammunition, with medical tents treating the wounded and rest areas where units rotated off the front lines. Their supply dumps contained more shells than my entire regiment had possessed. They had mobile kitchens, portable showers, and laundry facilities. They were fighting the most intense battle of the war and living better than we did in garrison. This proved that defeating them was impossible. They would never run out of food, ammunition, medicine, or fresh troops. We would. This relentless American logistics system created a form of attrition warfare that ultimately favored the Marines. Despite higher initial casualties, Japanese defenders fought from static positions with finite supplies and no hope of reinforcement. Every soldier lost was gone forever. Every bullet fired was one less in the stockpile. The Marines fought from an expanding beachhead, with supplies flowing in daily by ship and air. Their casualties were evacuated and replaced. Their ammunition was virtually limitless. The longer a battle dragged on, the weaker the Japanese became, while the Marines grew stronger. This dynamic proved decisive on Peleliu, where Colonel Kusaka's defense lasted from September 15th to November 27th. The 1st Marine Division suffered such heavy losses it was withdrawn and replaced by an Army division in October. The battle that Japanese planners thought would last 1 week dragged on for 11. The defenders inflicted over 10,000 American casualties, but the Americans could afford those losses and keep attacking. Japan could not afford to defend every island at such a cost. The arithmetic was simply unsustainable. By mid-1944, this unsustainability was clear to Japanese military leadership. Intelligence summaries distributed to garrison commanders acknowledged that Marines could not be stopped, only delayed. One document captured on Tinian provided guidance that revealed a complete abandonment of hope for victory. When defending against a Marine assault, do not expect to hold your positions indefinitely. The objective is to delay the American advance to enable other strategic goals. Each day of resistance is valuable. Each Marine killed or wounded is valuable. But understand that the position will eventually fall. Prepare for that reality. Stockpile maximum ammunition. Create redundant defensive lines. Plan for a staged withdrawal. Accept that you will likely die in the defense. Your sacrifice buys time for the empire. There is honor in this sacrifice, even without victory. This grim calculus defined Japanese defensive strategy for the final year of the Pacific War. Defenders no longer fought to win battles. They fought to make those battles so unbearably costly that the Americans might seek a negotiated peace rather than invade the Japanese home islands. The Marines, by accepting casualties that would have forced any other army to halt, completely negated this strategy. They paid the blood price demanded and just kept advancing. No cost was too high. No position was too strong. The offensive never, ever stopped. Private Hiroshi Onoda, one of the handful of survivors from Tarawa, later described the psychological impact. After the first day, we knew we would lose. The Marines had landed in overwhelming force. They had warships that pulverized our defenses. They had planes that bombed us without pause, but we still believed we could make them pay such a terrible price. that they would think twice about future invasions. Then we watched them continue to attack despite horrific losses. They walked through machine gun fire that cut down dozens. More Marines came behind them. We killed them too. More came. We fought for 3 days with absolute commitment. We inflicted thousands of casualties. We died almost to the last man, and the Marines took Tarawa on schedule. They paid the price we demanded and continued their advance across the Pacific. That was the moment we understood the war was lost. An enemy who will pay any price to win cannot be defeated by making victory expensive. This realization spread through the Japanese military as survivors from each battle carried their stories to the next. By the time the Marines landed on Iwo Jima in February 1945, every Japanese defender knew they faced the most implacable enemy in the Pacific. They knew they would die. They knew the Marines would take the island. The only question was how many Americans would die with them. General Kuribayashi's defensive plan accepted these realities and was built around them. His orders to his troops acknowledged what official propaganda still denied. We cannot win this battle. We can only make the Americans bleed for every inch of ground. That is our mission. Accept your death. Inflict casualties. Delay their advance. This is how we serve the empire in its most desperate hour. This assessment proved brutally accurate. The D-Day landing on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, provided the ultimate test of Japanese defensive theory against Marine capabilities. General Tadamachi Kuribashi, arguably Japan's most brilliant defensive commander in the Pacific, had spent months studying Marine tactics and designing fortifications specifically to counter them. His preparations were masterful, but before his theories were put to the test, elite Marine raiders had already demonstrated capabilities that went beyond standard excellence. These special units conducted deep penetration raids that created a level of terror far beyond their small numbers. Japanese forces learned that the raiders operated in darkness with a devastating proficiency. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki learned this the hard way on Guadalcanal in August 1942. His force of 900 men, veterans of China, planned a textbook night attack against Marine positions along the Ilu River. Raiders from the 1st Marine Raider Battalion were waiting in prepared ambush positions. Ichiki's force waded into the river at 1:30 a.m. on August 21st. The Raiders opened fire at point-blank range with automatic weapons supported by pre-sighted mortar and artillery fire. The engagement lasted 20 minutes. Japanese casualties exceeded 700 killed. Marine losses were 35. The Raiders were eventually disbanded and their members integrated into regular Marine divisions in 1944, but their aggressive tactics spread throughout the entire Corps. Soon, standard Marine infantry were employing techniques the Raiders had pioneered. Constant night patrols probed Japanese lines, small units made independent decisions, radio communications allowed for coordination that was unprecedented. The result was an enemy that fought 24 hours a day with an intensity Japanese forces could not hope to sustain. Corporal Akira Tanaka, who fought on 3 different islands before his capture on Okinawa, summarized the experience. The Marines never stopped. Daylight attacks with overwhelming firepower, nighttime attacks by small groups infiltrating our lines, constant artillery fire that prevented rest, air attacks all day long. We were under relentless pressure from the moment they landed until our defeat. The Japanese forces had always controlled the night. It was a time to rest and regroup after the day's fighting. Against the Marines, there was no rest. There was no safe period. There was only continuous combat until we were dead or captured. This was industrial warfare applied without a shred of mercy. The industrial nature of Marine operations both fascinated and horrified Japanese analysts. Unlike Japanese forces, which relied on spirit and personal sacrifice to overcome material shortcomings, the Marines systematically applied maximum force to every single problem. When they encountered a fortified position, they did not rely primarily on courage or clever tactics. They identified the target, called in artillery that fired hundreds of shells to obliterate it, brought forward tanks with flamethrowers to incinerate any survivors, and then sent in infantry to secure the rubble. If resistance somehow continued, naval gunfire from destroyers or even battleships would be called upon to erase the entire area from the map. This methodical destruction was horrifying in its cold efficiency. Second Lieutenant Renenda, an artillery observer on Saipan, watched Marine combined arms tactics during the June 1944 invasion. His diary contained detailed observations. The Marines landed under a blanket of fire from warships that shelled us for 3 hours before the first landing craft hit the beach. Aircraft bombed our positions for 2 hours before the landing. When the Marines came ashore, every single movement was supported by tanks, artillery, naval gunfire, and air strikes. They advanced slowly and methodically, destroying everything in their path. When we stopped them at a strong point, they called in battleship fire that literally erased entire hills from the landscape. They did not try to overcome our positions through bravery or clever maneuvering. They used overwhelming industrial scale force to eliminate the positions entirely, and then they advanced. This is not warfare as we understand it. This is systematic annihilation applied until resistance becomes impossible. And we fought with rifles and light machine guns. They fought with the entire productive capacity of an industrial nation. Endo's observations captured what so many Japanese soldiers realized far too late. The Pacific War was not a test of warrior spirit or tactical brilliance. It was a contest between Imperial Japan's limited industrial base and the overwhelming production capacity of the United States. The Marines were the sharp, hardened tip of that American industrial spear. They were warriors trained to exploit every American advantage ruthlessly while accepting casualties that leveraged their superior numbers and replacement system. Against such an enemy, Japanese courage and tactical skill meant almost nothing. The outcome was mathematically determined from the very beginning. Only the duration and the final body count remained unknown. General Kobayashi understood this. He famously banned the wasteful banzai charges that had thrown away Japanese lives in earlier battles. Instead, he created a defense in depth that was designed to channel the Marines into pre-sighted killing zones covered by multiple mutually supporting bunkers. He positioned artillery to deliver devastating fire on the landing beaches. He built 11 miles of tunnels connecting over 1,500 cave positions. Every approach was registered for mortar and artillery fire. The beach was a perfect death trap. 3 Marine divisions, totaling 70,000 men, landed on Iwo Jima on February 19th. Initially, Kobayashi's defenses worked exactly as planned. The pre-invasion naval bombardment had done little to his deep fortifications. The Marines landed in orderly waves and immediately began taking catastrophic losses. Within minutes, the black volcanic sand was littered with the dead and wounded. Japanese artillery observers called down perfectly coordinated barrages. The assault appeared to be on the verge of failure. Then something happened that Kobayashi had not fully anticipated, though he should have known from previous battles. The Marines did not pull back to regroup. They advanced directly into the artillery fire. They found the gaps between Japanese strongpoints and exploited them. When a bunker halted the advance, demolition teams crawled forward under heavy fire to destroy it. When those teams were killed, other Marines immediately took their place. The attack never lost its momentum. Private Kenji Sato watched from his bunker as Marines assaulted a position to his right. His diary records the sheer disbelief the defenders felt. A Marine flamethrower team approached the bunker. We shot the operator. His assistant picked up the weapon and continued forward. We shot him. A third Marine took the flamethrower. We wounded him badly. He kept firing the weapon until it was empty. Then he threw grenades into our firing ports until we finally killed him. By that time, demolition engineers had reached the bunker's entrance. The position was lost. I saw this happen 30 times in 1 hour. How do you defeat men who will not stop? The answer, as the Japanese defenders discovered, was that you could not. The brutal arithmetic of Iwo Jima demonstrated Marine doctrine in its purest, most terrifying form. 70,000 Marines landed, 26,000 became casualties, including nearly 7,000 killed, but all 21,000 Japanese defenders died, except for 216 who were captured, most of them unconscious or too badly wounded to resist. The Marines paid an almost unimaginable price, but they took every single objective. Kobayashi himself, who survived until late March 1945, wrote his final assessment in a message smuggled to Tokyo before his command post fell. The Marines are the most effective fighting force I have ever encountered. They possess several attributes that make them uniquely dangerous. First, their training produces soldiers willing to accept casualty levels that would break any other unit. Second, their firepower exceeds ours by a factor of 5 to 1 in artillery and 10 to 1 in air support. Third, their junior leaders make decisions at the squad level that our officers would only make at the company level, allowing them to exploit opportunities faster than we can react. Fourth, and most critically, they never cease their attacks. There is no defense that can survive this combination indefinitely. This final point is what truly terrified Japanese defenders across the Pacific. Soldiers could accept being defeated in battle. They could understand being outgunned or outmaneuvered. What they could not comprehend was an enemy that would simply not stop, no matter how many of them were killed. Corporal Akira Tanaka, who fought on 3 islands before his capture on Okinawa, explained in a post-war interview, "You must understand the difference between the Marines and other American forces. Army units would attack, take heavy losses, and then pull back to reorganize. This is sensible military practice. The Marines would attack, take heavy losses, and just keep attacking over the bodies of their own dead. This is not standard doctrine. This is something else entirely." The quality that made the Marines so feared was not an accident. It was deliberately forged through a training regimen that broke recruits down to nothing and then rebuilt them into warriors whose very identity was inseparable from the Corps. Documents captured on Saipan included an interrogation report of a Marine prisoner who tried to explain this transformation to baffled Japanese officers. Boot camp is 8 weeks. For the first 4 weeks, the drill instructors systematically destroy everything civilian about the recruit. You are told you are worthless, that you will never be a Marine, that you should quit and join the Army. The abuse is mental and physical. You are pushed past what you think is your breaking point and then pushed further. Those who quit are shamed. Those who remain learn that surrender is not an option. The Japanese officer noted in the report, "This resembles our own training but is more systematic." However, the Marine prisoner then described a second phase that had no direct parallel. The next 4 weeks, the instructors build you back up into a Marine. You learn that you are part of something much bigger than yourself, that every Marine who ever lived is your brother. This created a unique bond. Marines fought not just for victory, but because to fail was to betray every other Marine who had ever worn the uniform. This immense psychological pressure created fighters who would advance when every rational calculation said they should stop. Japanese forces encountered this mentality during a massive banzai charge that, by all traditional doctrine, should have succeeded, but instead failed catastrophically. On the night of July 6-7, 1944, on Saipan, General Saito led a final charge of between 3,000 and 4,000 Japanese soldiers against the lines of the 27th Infantry Division. Japanese doctrine held that such an assault, carried out with absolute commitment, would shatter the American defense through sheer ferocity and the defenders' fear of being overrun. The Marines and soldiers in the path of the charge were mostly sleeping when the screaming mass of Japanese soldiers poured into their positions at 3:00 a.m. They overran forward positions through sheer weight of numbers. Standard doctrines would suggest a fight and retreat to regroup. Instead, the Americans counterattacked immediately. Officers and sergeants organized desperate defensive stands at key points. They used every weapon available, from artillery fired at point-blank range to trench knives in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The fighting raged for hours. When the sun rose, the ground was covered with Japanese bodies. American casualties were around 400 killed and 500 wounded. Nearly all 3,000 Japanese attackers died. Private First Class Saburo Ito survived the charge with severe wounds. His interrogation report captured the shock Japanese soldiers felt. "We were told that Americans are afraid of close combat, that they depend on firepower because they are cowards at heart. We charged into their lines, expecting them to break and run. They stood and fought us hand to hand and destroyed us. I saw a Marine sergeant kill 7 of my comrades with a bayonet and his pistol before he went down. This is not cowardice. We were deceived." The deception extended to every aspect of what the Marines could endure. Japanese propaganda had spent years describing Americans as soft, individualistic people who could not withstand hardship. Yet the Japanese soldiers saw Marines living in water-filled foxholes, eating cold rations for weeks on end, and fighting in 100-degree heat with extreme humidity. This contradicted every claim. Japanese soldiers who were supposedly trained to endure hardship watched the Marines not only survive, but thrive in conditions that pushed Japanese endurance to its absolute limit. Corporal Takeshi Morita, who survived Guadalcanal before being transferred to Bougainville, described the stark contrast in living conditions. We were on half rations by September 1942, a little rice twice a day, sometimes less. We foraged for anything edible in the jungle. We watched the Marines eat 3 full meals a day, sometimes more. They got regular resupply by air and sea. They had clean water, medical supplies, and unlimited ammunition. We realized we were fighting an enemy who would never run out of resources. That realization broke something inside of us. The material superiority the Marines enjoyed was total. When faced with a fortified bunker, they could call in artillery that delivered hundreds of shells in a matter of minutes, bring forward Sherman tanks equipped with flamethrowers, and use naval gunfire that could level small mountains. If that failed, demolition teams would pack hundreds of pounds of explosives against the position. Lieutenant Jiro Tanaka, before his death on Guadalcanal, wrote what may be the most comprehensive analysis of Marine combined arms tactics captured during the entire war. The Marines do not fight as individual soldiers. They fight as integrated components of a single, devastating machine. Riflemen locate and fix our position. Machine gunners suppress our fire. Mortar crews lay down smoke to blind our observers. Artillery destroys our bunkers. Tanks advance with infantry following closely behind. Aircraft bomb any position the artillery cannot hit. This entire process unfolds within minutes of first contact, coordinated by junior officers using radios that we do not possess. We cannot counter this because we cannot coordinate our actions at the same speed. By the time our commander understands the situation and issues orders, the Marines have already moved to exploit the weakness we have just revealed. This incredible speed of execution was possible because the Marines delegated authority down to the lowest possible level. Sergeants made decisions that Japanese doctrine reserved for captains. Corporals led assaults that in the Imperial Japanese Army would require a lieutenant's authorization. The result was an enemy that adapted to changing battlefield conditions faster than Japanese forces could possibly react. When a bunker stopped a Marine advance, a sergeant would immediately redirect the attack through a different route while simultaneously calling for supporting fire, all without waiting for orders from a higher command. Japanese defenders often found themselves fighting enemies who appeared from completely unexpected directions because the Marines had identified and exploited a weakness before the Japanese commanders even knew it existed. Perhaps the most feared weapon in the Marine arsenal was not the rifle or the artillery piece, but the flamethrower. Japanese soldiers trained to accept an honorable death in combat discovered that the flamethrower offered no such honor. Corporal Akira Tanaka, captured on Okinawa with burns covering 40% of his body, described the psychological impact. We were taught that death in battle is glorious. Death by bullet, by bayonet, by shell, these are a warrior's end. Fire is something else entirely. You watch the flames approach your position, you smell your comrades burning alive, you hear their screams. There is no glory in that death. It is industrial slaughter. This is what the Marines understood that we did not. Modern war has no room for glory. It is about killing the enemy as efficiently as possible, using the best tools available. This grim realization came too late for most Japanese defenders. By 1944, every Japanese soldier in the Pacific knew that facing the Marines meant confronting the most lethal combination of training, equipment, and military doctrine the Americans could field. Intelligence reports distributed to garrison forces described the Marines with a mixture of respect and dread that was almost superstitious. One document captured on Tinian in July 1944 provided detailed guidance on defending against Marine assaults. The report acknowledged several hard facts that contradicted years of propaganda. First, Marines are on average physically larger and stronger than Japanese soldiers due to superior nutrition from childhood. Second, Marines receive more ammunition, better weapons, and more reliable equipment than our troops. Third, Marine training emphasizes marksmanship to a degree we cannot match. The average Marine rifleman can hit targets at ranges where our soldiers cannot. Fourth, Marines operate with air and naval support that we can neither match nor counter. Fifth, and most critically, Marines are conditioned to believe that surrender is not an option. They will fight to the death or to victory. There is no third alternative. The report then provided tactical guidance that revealed how completely Japanese confidence had collapsed. When facing Marines, do not expect them to retreat. Do not assume that inflicting casualties will break their morale. Do not believe that numerical superiority will help you, as their firepower negates any advantage in numbers. Do not attempt banzai charges unless you have absolutely no other choice, as the Marines will slaughter charging troops with automatic weapons and artillery. Do not expect them to fear night attacks. They fight just as effectively in darkness. The only effective defense is to be dug into prepared positions with interlocking fields of fire, with multiple fallback positions prepared in advance, and with the full understanding that your position will eventually be overrun. The goal is not to stop the Marines, but to inflict maximum casualties before your position falls. This defensive doctrine acknowledged a harsh reality but offered no path to victory. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, preparing the defenses of Iwo Jima in early 1945, understood this perfectly. He wrote to his wife in January, 1 month before the invasion, "I have been ordered to defend Iwo Jima against the American Marines. This is a mathematical equation with only one solution. The Marines will land with 70,000 men. They will have total control of the sea and the air. They will bring unlimited ammunition and supplies. They will attack until Iwo Jima is theirs. My mission is not to defeat them. That is impossible. My mission is to make them pay such a terrible price that the Americans will reconsider invading our homeland. Every day I keep them fighting is another day for the empire to prepare. Every Marine I kill is one less enemy for the final battle." Kuribayashi's strategy reflected the painful evolution of Japanese defensive doctrine, from confident aggression to desperate attrition. The Marines who landed on Iwo Jima on February 19th faced defenses designed not to repel them, but to bleed them white in the hope of destroying American political will. Every bunker was placed to require a direct, costly assault. Every cave entrance was covered by multiple firing points. Every single meter of ground had to be paid for in blood. The strategy failed because it fundamentally misunderstood Marine culture. High casualties did not break the Marine spirit, they reinforced it. Every fallen comrade demanded vengeance. Every day of brutal combat strengthened the survivors' resolve to win. The worse the fighting became, the harder the Marines fought. This was incomprehensible to the Japanese military mind, which assumed that even the most fanatical troops had a breaking point. Private Kenji Sato, who survived until March 10th before dying in his bunker, wrote his final diary entry the night before. "Tomorrow, the Marines will reach this position. We have killed hundreds of them over these past 3 weeks. More arrive every single day. They do not grow weaker. They do not slow down. They do not stop. I believed our spirit was stronger than American materialism. I was wrong. The Marines have both spirit and material. They possess courage equal to our own, combined with weapons and supplies we cannot hope to match. They are what we claim to be. We are what we claimed they were. This is the truth we die knowing." His bunker was destroyed the next morning by a Marine demolition team after a 6-hour fight that killed all 11 defenders and wounded 3 Marines. The position delayed the Marine advance by exactly 40 minutes before it was bypassed by other units who continued moving forward while combat engineers reduced the bunker. This pattern repeated itself thousands of times across Iwo Jima. Japanese defenders fought with desperate, incredible courage, inflicted terrible casualties, and achieved nothing except their own annihilation. The battle ended on March 26th. The final statistics tell the story of what happened when the Marines met the finest defenses Japan could create. 21,000 Japanese defenders died, 216 surrendered, most unconscious or incapacitated. The Marines suffered 26,000 casualties from the 70,000 men committed, a casualty rate of nearly 40%. Any other military force in the world would have required months, if not years, to recover. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions were back in action within 6 weeks. This incredible ability to absorb catastrophic losses and continue fighting became the defining characteristic that most terrified the Japanese. Corporal Takeshi Morita, imprisoned in Hawaii after his capture, explained in a 1946 interview what Japanese soldiers felt when facing the Marines. "The worst part was knowing they would never stop. You could kill half a Marine unit and the survivors would keep attacking. You could wound their officers and their sergeants would take command. You could fight them to utter exhaustion and they would attack again at first light. There was no way to win. You could only kill them until they killed you. That is not war. That is mutual annihilation. And the Marines had far more men to annihilate than we did." The American industrial capacity that produced endless waves of replacement Marines stunned Japanese military planners. Intelligence reports from late 1944 noted that Marine divisions suffered 75% casualties on Peleliu in September, yet returned to full strength within 3 months. Those very replacements landed on Iwo Jima in February and fought with the same terrifying effectiveness as the veterans. This ability to regenerate defeated units was completely beyond Japanese capabilities. The Imperial Japanese Army had no comparable training pipeline, no system that could maintain unit quality while absorbing such horrific losses. American efficiency extended to every facet of Marine operations. Wounded Marines often received advanced medical treatment within minutes of being hit. A sophisticated casualty evacuation system using boats and aircraft moved wounded men from the battlefield to fully equipped hospital ships in a matter of hours. The availability of blood plasma, antibiotics, and advanced surgical care saved lives at a rate unprecedented in military history. Japanese wounded, by contrast, often died from a simple lack of medical supplies, from infected wounds, or from injuries that American medicine could routinely treat. Captured Japanese soldiers watched in amazement as Marines who should have died from their wounds instead survived, recovered, and returned to fight again. The final, profound humiliation came after the Japanese surrender in August 1945. Marines occupied the Japanese home islands, expecting fierce resistance from a population indoctrinated to die rather than submit. Instead, they found exhausted, broken people who were largely grateful the war was over. Private First Class Saburo Ito, repatriated in 1946 after recovering from his Saipan wounds, described his return. Everything we were told was a lie. The Marines did not torture prisoners. They gave us food, medicine, and shelter. They treated us with more humanity than our own officers often had. The Americans were not barbarians. We had been the barbarians. That knowledge destroyed what little faith we had left in the empire. Thousands of other former Japanese soldiers reached the same conclusion. Post-war interrogation reports reveal common themes: a hard-earned respect for Marine fighting qualities, a deep bitterness toward a Japanese leadership that had lied about American capabilities, and a stark recognition that the war had been hopeless from the start because Japan could never match American industrial power or the sheer fighting quality of troops like the Marines. The most comprehensive assessment came from General Tadamichi Kurabayashi himself in a final message from Iwo Jima delivered by a desperate radio transmission on March 21st, just days before the island fell. He wrote, "I have fought the Marines for 31 days. They are the finest soldiers I have ever faced. Their training is superior, their equipment is overwhelming, their courage is the equal of our own, and their numbers appear endless. Japan cannot defeat such an enemy. We can only die fighting them and hope our sacrifice buys enough time for peace negotiations that might preserve something of our nation. To my fellow officers preparing to defend the home islands, know this: the Marines will come. You cannot stop them. You can only make them pay in blood for every meter of ground. Perhaps if the price is high enough, they will choose to negotiate rather than destroy us completely. That is our only hope." That hope died with the atomic bombs in August. But Kurabayashi's assessment of the Marines proved utterly accurate. They were the tip of the spear that shattered Japanese defensive lines across the entire Pacific. They paid a terrible, blood-drenched price with casualty rates that would have crippled lesser organizations. But they never broke, they never retreated, and they never surrendered a single objective they were ordered to take. They were, in a profound irony, exactly what Japanese propaganda had claimed the Imperial Japanese Army to be: invincible warriors who would fight to the death before accepting defeat. The final, crushing irony was that the Marines achieved this not through mystical warrior spirit or notions of racial superiority, but through systematic, realistic training and the application of overwhelming material support. They proved that modern warfare required both raw courage and industrial capacity, both rigorous training and advanced technology, both individual sacrifice and the vast resources of a nation. Japan had courage and training in abundance. America had everything. The Marines were the ultimate embodiment of that totality in a way no other American unit could match. Geronium veterans came to recognize this distinction. Corporal Akira Tanaka, interviewed as an old man in 1975, summarized what his generation learned from fighting the Marines. We were taught that spirit alone could conquer material strength, that our willingness to die made us invincible. The Marines taught us that spirit, when combined with material, conquers spirit alone. They were just as willing to die as we were, but they also had Sherman tanks and naval gunfire and unlimited ammunition, air supremacy, and medical care and food, and the entire industrial output of America behind them. We had our rifles, our courage, and empty promises of victory. That was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The Marines proved that on every single island they took. The statistical record supports this conclusion without question. The Marines fought in every major Pacific campaign, from Guadalcanal in August 1942 to Okinawa in June 1945. They suffered 86,000 total casualties, including 19,500 killed, but they never failed to take an objective, never abandoned a position once it was captured, and never gave the Japanese forces any reason to believe that the Marines could be defeated through superior tactics or fighting spirit. The price was horrific. The results were absolute. Japanese military analysts studying Marine operations after the war reached a unanimous verdict. The Marines represented the ultimate expression of American military power. They combined a warrior ethos that matched Japanese Bushido with the industrial resources of the American economy. They trained soldiers who were willing to die for victory while simultaneously providing those soldiers with the weapons and support that made victory inevitable. This combination was utterly unbeatable. These lessons were learned too late for the 21,000 Japanese soldiers who faced the Marines on Iwo Jima, or the tens of thousands who fought them on Okinawa, or the hundreds of thousands preparing to face them on the home islands before the surrender. Those men knew only one thing for certain: the Marines were the enemy they feared above all others, the enemy their commanders could not stop, the enemy who would keep coming no matter how many of them died, until every last Japanese defender was dead. Private Kenji Sato's final diary entry, written just hours before his death in a bunker on Iwo Jima, captured this terrible knowledge. He wrote, "The Marines will win this war, not because they are braver than we are, not because they desire victory more than we do. They will win because their nation gives them every single thing they need to win, and they will use those resources without mercy, without hesitation, until every one of us is dead." This is the truth our leaders should have told us from the beginning. We are samurai fighting with swords against men with machine guns who also possess the heart of a samurai. There was never any hope. There was only death. His bunker was silenced the following day. The Marines who cleared it found his diary and sent it to intelligence for translation. His words were filed away among thousands of similar documents, a silent testament to a truth learned through brutal experience across the Pacific. Fighting the United States Marines was not like fighting any other American unit. It was not like fighting the British or the Chinese or any other foe. It was facing an opponent who combined everything Japan claimed to possess with everything Japan critically lacked. That combination made the Marines the most feared enemy the Japanese soldier would ever face. The statistics tell part of the story, the battles tell more, but the words of the Japanese soldiers who survived tell the complete, unvarnished truth. They fought against men who would not stop, who would not surrender, who would die before accepting defeat, and who possessed the weapons and the logistical support to make that spirit devastatingly effective. Against such an enemy, courage was not enough. Training was not enough. Determination was not enough. Nothing was enough except surrender or death. The Japanese military, by and large, chose death. The Marines delivered it with a systematic, relentless, and terrifying efficiency. That is why Japanese soldiers hated and feared fighting the American Marines more than any other unit in the Pacific.